Thanks very much. It's a great honor and pleasure to be here with former Secretary of State, former UN Ambassador Madeleine Albright. I'll start right off. A lot of the foreign policy discussion we've heard in the last day and a half here has been very dark toned. The world is going to hell, the U.S. is retreating, things are blowing up, the Russians are gaining ground, we don't know how to deal with big crises. What's your overview? Are things as bad as that? The tone of that description largely went with party lines, but there is a tone of just things are bad for the United States now in the world. What's your overview comment?
Well, the world is a mess. That's a diplomatic term of art, but I am not feeling dark about it.
Yeah.
I do think that there are a whole host of issues that were not there before, some due to globalization, some due to the rise of technology, questions of identity, and what the role of the United States is. And I do think that President Clinton said it first, but I said it so often that I got identified with the word indispensable. We are indispensable, but there is nothing in the word, the definition of it, that says alone. I do think that what we're seeing is how the United States operates with partners to deal with some of the more complicated issues that we've seen.
One of the most acute issues, and David Mildan was discussing it just earlier today, is of course the refugee crisis. You originally came to the United States with your family as a girl, as a refugee. You've written about America's obligation to do more for the refugees from Syria and elsewhere. Tell us what you think we should do and whether that is conceivable at this kind of political moment in the United States where the tone is so anti-immigrant or foreigner at all.
Well, I do think we need to do more. I think the United States is, as the Pope reminded us, a country of immigrants, where I think people are very grateful to come here. I know I am and will always be. I always describe myself as a grateful American. I do think that what has to happen is to figure out if we want others to do what they're supposed to do, which is bring the refugees in, then we have to take the lead on it. And I think that we do have an obligation to explain why this is important. But ultimately, and I'm so thrilled to be an American, but I think most people actually want to live in the country where they were born, which means that we have to work to try to resolve the issues that makes people actually pick up and leave and walk for miles and be afraid of drowning and then being treated like animals when they get wherever they are. I think that we do have an obligation to do more.
And you had a background in practical politics before you became an august diplomat. How can you imagine the Democratic Party presumably making the case for opening the borders to more refugees during this upcoming election year?
Well, I do think that one of the issues that's always out there is how domestic and foreign policy goes together.
Yeah.
And there's no question that there is a sense in America we're tired from 2 wars and kind of a sense of why aren't people more grateful to us for everything that we've done. I think it has to be argued as a way. What is interesting, I think no matter what, people are very proud of our values. And so I do think not everybody would be on top of each other. And let me just say this, I just was up in New York at the Clinton Global Initiative, and we were having a session with the King of Jordan. And we were talking about what the neighboring countries have to deal with on the Syria issue. So Jordan has refugees not only from Syria, but also Iraq and the Palestinians. And I said something like, well, it's as though, in terms of ratios, it's as though the United States had 40 million refugees. And somebody corrected me and said, no, 60 million. Wow. So just visualize this country that is a frontline state, a small country, that is in a very difficult position, and they have so many refugee camps. We're a very big country. I fly over it fairly regularly, and there's a lot of space.
And talking about refugees, we are talking about accommodating the results of all this turmoil in the Middle East. Is there anything the United States could or should be doing differently right now about the underlying cause in Syria in particular?
I do think so. I think we should have done something earlier. I think that what is really hard, Jim, is that foreign policy doesn't come in 4-year segments. Yeah. And we are dealing with a lot of the results of what happened in the war in Iraq. Yeah. We can talk more about that, but that is really what has happened. And I think the following things, if I might, I do teach, and I say every country makes foreign policy based on 5 factors. The first factor is objective, which are, what's the location, geographical, what is the resource base. Interestingly enough, that doesn't change very often. It has now with our oil issue. The second is subjective, which is how does a country feel about itself? And I do think people feel, as I said, are tired from things before. The third is how the government is organized, and the executive-legislative relations, in our case, plays a huge role. The fourth are the bureaucratic politics that are reflected in what the budget looks like. And the fifth, the role of individuals. We should, I think, despite the tiredness and some of the budget issues, begin to go back and look at what we could be doing in Syria in terms of establishing safe havens and working in some way to get a transition. And if, in fact, the issue is about elections, if there are elections there, they have to be monitored internationally and be free and fair and have a lot of people there observing what's going on.
A lot of your writing and work in your post-secretarial life has included concern to issues of governance, global governance, and as you're just saying, ways in which the United States can think of governing its foreign policy more effectively. Tell us what you think are practical steps, practical ambitions on the global governance front. We'll get to domestic in a moment, but what, in a time of chaos and centrifugal forces, what are reasonable ambitions for the United States to hope for and lead towards?
Let me just say, I do believe in our value system, and I actually believe that people want to make decisions about their own lives. I know there are a lot of people who say, well, X people are not ready for democracy. I think we're all the same, and everybody wants to be able to. You begin by thinking about where your kids go to school or where language or et cetera, and then it goes up the chain in terms of trying to make decisions. Then I am chairman of the board of the National Democratic Institute, and people think of it always as elections. Now, elections are necessary but not sufficient. So what has to happen is to develop some institutional structures for governance. Rule of law, the capability of having the right of assembly, commercial codes, any number of things. They take a while, and Americans are the most generous people in the world with the shortest attention span. And so what we have to do is figure that it takes a while, and that you can't impose democracy. That's an oxymoron. But you can, in fact, provide the nuts and bolts and talk about the relationship of the elections to the governance. And then I have said all along, democracy has to deliver. People want to vote and eat. And so there has to be an economic component in terms of what the deliverables are on this. But I do think it's the right thing. And democracy, there's not just American democracy. There are other aspects of it. But I do think, so we have been NDIs in a number of countries, and we talk about what the nuts and bolts are. And somebody said, so what's the main aspect of democracy? And I say, compromise. And they say, yeah, like you guys. So at the moment, we are not the best examples.
And that's the next thing I wanted to ask you. As I've lived outside the United States for a long time, and when I come back here, I'm always impressed that the U.S. is so robust in so many ways except national-level governance right now. You were talking earlier about your days as Secretary of State, where Jesse Helms had an affable working relationship with you. Can you describe a little bit more about that and how you think we would recapture the golden age of Jesse Helms in our...
That's really... People will not believe this. If I might tell you what happened, I was ambassador at the UN, and I get a phone call from him saying that I had been invited to a college called St. Mary's College in Raleigh, North Carolina, that was celebrating its bicentennial. And I thought I actually could get out of it by saying, yes, I'd be happy to do it if you come with me. So he calls me back, and he says, I've rearranged my schedule, I'm coming. So one of the things that happens, if you are invited by somebody and they're supposed to introduce you, they're not going to say you're a complete jerk. So then he invited me to come to his alma mater. And I was actually asked questions about the United Nations and the Chemical Weapons Convention and various issues. But what had happened was we had been driving around North Carolina at first looking for barbecue places, and he was kind of bionic with artificial hips, and we're getting out of the car, and I'm hanging on to him. and all of a sudden there was a picture about the odd couple. But we disagreed on many, many things. But he said to me when I was named as Secretary of State, Ms. Madeleine, we will make history together. And he was very, very instrumental in terms of NATO expansion, any number of different aspects. We did disagree on things, but I think we saw what it was like to represent America in some way, either in Congress as chairman, he was chairman by then, and as secretary, and we found things to agree on. And I think it is, go back to my 5 factors, I think we have to get some bipartisan support for foreign policy.
You have standing to speak on this the rest of us don't have, of what it is like actually to conduct diplomacy when the sort of surface level tension in Washington is so great. Has it made an actual difference in how the Obama administration has been able to carry out its foreign policy, that domestic politics are so divided now?
Well, let me just say, I have always been a believer in the interaction of domestic and foreign policy. Now, I have been an advisor to many presidential candidates, and often foreign policy isn't important, and I used to do this to make myself more important, to say domestic and foreign policy go together, but they really do, and I think it's important for us to recognize that. I have just been in New York, and I met with a foreign leader, and this foreign leader actually said, we don't understand when we see you as more monolithic in the views, and when some member of Congress says something totally outrageous, I think you had one of them here, that basically they don't understand. They think that it's somehow all connected. The other part is that I do think, as a democracy, we do have to explain our foreign policy to the American people. You can't have a foreign policy without domestic support. And I happen to believe that Americans are better off when the United States is involved, is respected, and understands that we are the indispensable nation.
So, in our final couple of minutes, I'd like to talk about actual politics, which has been a theme of a lot of the discussions here. If you were assessing the likely foreign policy of a Republican administration, Donald Trump's or otherwise, how different do you think it could be from the last 8 years, the 8 years before that?
Given what I've heard, bad and very different. And I think there's a real difference, if I might say so, is America is essential in foreign policy, but it doesn't mean dictating to everybody. And there has to, what is the real aspect of diplomacy is being able to put yourself into the other person's shoes and understanding that every agreement cannot be a zero-sum game. We need to respect the countries that we deal with. We can't insult everybody. And I think that it is very important. I think it would be very different. And I happen to think that what President Obama is doing is understanding the partnership aspect of the indispensable. Americans don't like the word multilateralism. It has too many syllables and it ends in an ism. But it basically is just partnership and understanding what the world is like, that you need to have partners. And if you look at issues like climate change or nuclear proliferation or the spread of disease, no matter how powerful the United States is, we cannot do it alone just by virtue of what the subjects are.
And finally, on your friend, your successor as Secretary of State, candidate for President Hillary Clinton, if she became president, how would her foreign policy likely differ from the past 8 years? Also, how should we think about the email situation?
Well, I think that I know her very well and admire her, and I think that she would be the best prepared person to be president of anybody that we've had in a very, very long time. I think she is able to link that domestic and foreign policy, given her own experiences. And one of the major things she did as Secretary of State was to restore America's reputation. You can't militarize democracy, and you can't invade countries for no reason. And so I think that she really would be amazing. I think that she has said that she made a mistake on the emails. She has apologized for it. And I think that I am very lucky because I went to college sometime between the invention of the iPad and the discovery of fire. And I didn't use email.
Great, thank you. And so we have only a few seconds. What is the thing you feel most optimistic about in the foreign policy of the United States now?
That we will have a President Clinton. And no, what I really do feel very optimistic about is that we have the capability of really making decisions, of trying to sort out what is not just best for us, but for the rest of the world. Now, I'm often asked if I'm an optimist or a pessimist. I am an optimist who worries a lot. So this doesn't happen automatically. We're going to have to work at it, and we are going to have the help of the media. I have to say that, where these issues are complicated and they require those of us that care, and you do, to be able to explain what is going on. It is really hard.
That's a whole other conversation. And for now, please join me in thanking Secretary Madeleine Albright.